As one of the co-chairs of the G20 summit here in London, and in an exclusive interview today, I spoke with Korean President Lee Myung-bak. He shared his views on what Korea hopes to achieve at this meeting, how Asian economies are coping with the global downturn, and where he stands on trade and protectionism.
As one of the co-chairs of the G20, what do you hope to achieve from this meeting of leaders?
Well, first of all, I think all the leaders are gathered in London to overcome the financial crisis that is facing us. And so through that, to revive the global economy, and through international cooperation, I think all the leaders are committed to doing this.
Exports in Korea were down, but not as bad as the last couple of months. Can you characterize where the country is today in terms of economic vitality?
Yes, in terms of our finance situation in Korea, I think we can say that it is relatively doing well compared to other countries. In terms of external trade, considering that global trade has gone down considerably, Korea, again, in this sector, we have been doing quite well. If we look at the statistics for the months of January up until March of this year, you can see that it has been quite stable in terms of Korea's external trade. So as a result, we expect to post trade surplus. And so at the end of this year, we're looking to maybe between $15 to $20 billion of trade surplus.
Korea has had some experience with toxic assets in terms of the banking system, stemming from the Asian financial crisis in 1997 and 98. The government lifted $111 billion in debt from bank balance sheets. Can you give us some detail of a plan that you are expecting to put forth and that you think might work for a global solution?
Yes, like you rightly pointed out, back in 1997-98, during the Asian financial crisis, the Korean government did successfully overcome the financial crisis back then. And we wish to share some of the lessons that we learned back in 1997-98. However, I am very mindful that our experience and the lessons that we learned cannot be repeated point by point, because all countries are in a very different position. But I think there are some common principles that may still be applied to the current financial crisis. And so this also must be done through international cooperation, and also this can be done so as to revive the global real economy as well.
Tell me about the bad bank solution. Your administration has set up 20 trillion won fund as a bad bank. What impact has the financial crisis had on your country's banks?
Yes, I think our experience back in 97, once again, really has made our Korean banking sector very healthy and competitive, because during the Asian crisis, we set up what we call the Korea Asset Management Corporation, called KAMCO. This was, of course, government-led, and this is the main vehicle which bought up all the impaired assets at the time. And we've also had an ex-post settlement scheme whereby once the economy recovered and the values soared once again to its previous level, we were able to sell them off and also to share the profits with the original bank or the financial institutions that sold them. So I think this allowed us to really speedily adapt and to do whatever the government needed to do at the time to stabilize the market back then. And also this had another very positive side effect, and that was to prevent moral hazard from spreading, because all the bank owners, the shareholders, the workers, and all the stakeholders took part in these efforts. And I think by doing so, we were able to once again revive the flow of credit, which was crucially important for us to overcome the crisis back then.
So do you believe that the assets on the bank balance sheets globally today will eventually be marked up and the values will be much better than they are right now?
Yes, I do believe if we are to apply these basic principles to getting rid of the impaired assets on the balance sheets of banks, I do believe that they will have a positive effect. Of course, we can't really talk about the exact time frame, but perhaps in the next 2 to 3 years, I do foresee that the value of the impaired assets will improve and become better than it is today.
Can you give us a sense of where the growth comes from in the coming 5 years?
Yes, in a relatively short period of time, Korean companies and industrialists were managed to go through industrialization and also through the era of information and technology to achieve the growth that we see today. And I think the large reason behind this was due to the industriousness and the challenging spirit of the Korean people and its people in the industry. So for the last 5 years or so, Korea did have an advantage in the information technology sector, but in the future, for the next 5 to 10 years, I think we will continue our focus on green industry and green development. And not only that, but we will strive to obtain the core technologies that will allow us and enable us to have the global competitiveness for the next 5 to 10 years.
Meanwhile, trade as well as protectionism has become really an issue. These two issues have become very important, front and center. And many of the nations here are looking inward. France asking companies not to fire French workers, the U.S. saying to buy American. What can you do specifically to ensure that the G20 work together and not try only to protect their own nations?
Yes, I think all the countries, they still remember the history and the lessons that history taught us. When we look at during the Great Depression of the 1930s, we learned and we still remember the fact how when countries put up protectionist barriers, recovery is only prolonged and it doesn't benefit anyone. So that is why the leaders, when we met in Washington last November, we agreed to a standstill, meaning that we will not erect any new trade or investment barriers. And we made a pledge on that, but then I think in London here it is important for us to recount the message then and to recommit ourselves to this standstill pledge. And as a follow-up measure, as an actionable measure, I think it is important for the leaders to give a mandate to the World Trade Organization to report on a regular basis to the practices of any protectionist measures that we may see.
Korea is set to sign a trade deal with the European Union on the sidelines of this summit. What are you hoping to achieve?
I believe the Korea-EU FTA is very significant. And of course, the most idealistic situation would be for the global community to agree on the speedy conclusion of the Doha round. However, in the meantime, because we believe that this may take some time, in the meantime, Korea will be signing free trade agreements like the one that we are set to do with the European Union. And I think by doing so, we will be able to positively contribute to reviving global trade, which is desperately needed.
Broadly speaking, on the economy, we know that the entire Asian region has slowed down considerably. How significant has it been?
Yes, I think the current global downturn has very much affected the economies in Asia, and especially the new and emerging economies in Asia have been hard hit by the current economic crisis. And so I believe that we must do all that we can to provide help for these new and emerging economies around the world by providing more credit to these economies that is needed for them to continue their path of development, and also providing trade finance and other measures that is needed for us to sustain their level of development before these problems become so acute that there is nothing that we can do about it. I think prevention and preemptive measure is very important, not only for their own economies, but for the global economy as a whole. So I think this is another very important issue that the leaders here gathered in London should discuss.
Final question. What will it be? What will it take for you to walk away from this summit and say the G20 was a big success?
Yes, well, I guess you could say, first of all, if the leaders can come to an agreement on increasing fiscal expenditures through international cooperation. Number two would be to come to an agreement on specific ways to tackle the issue of impaired assets. That is a burden on the banking sector and the financial sector. Number three would be to provide assistance to the new and emerging economies through credit and also through trade finance. And also, fourthly, we could talk about the international financial regulatory regime and how we can strengthen it, how we can improve the transparency and the accountability of credit rating agencies, and also the issue of offshore tax havens. These are some of the very important and critical issues that the leaders should and must discuss during the London G20 summit while we are gathered here, and also during the third G20 summit meeting. I think and I hope that we can make some assessments as to the actions that we took and some of the measures that we've taken.
My thanks to President Lee of South Korea.